Ladies and gentlemen, 27 minutes of Nolan Bianchi coming at you.
You are Locked On Lions, your daily Detroit Lions podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, let's do this, everybody, on a Tuesday, March 4th and a Wednesday, March 5th. It is Locked On Lions on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Matt Derry with you. We've got to talk some Combine. One of the guys that was there covering the Lions, covering the Combine for the Detroit News, Nolan Bianchi. By the way, Locked On alumnus, used to host the Locked On Red Wings podcast, joins us today on this very show. Nolan, great to see you, brother.
Great to talk to you as well. Yeah, and it's been a while since I've been with Locked On Red Wings, but I miss it. I wish I would have been able to do it when the team was like semi-good, but maybe not going through a pandemic as well. But you take what you can get. I miss my time at Locked On, and happy to be here with you today.
Always good to talk to you, my friend. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen, checking us out wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe and watch on our Locked On Lions YouTube channel as well. Shout out to our everydayers that are out there that watch and listen to the podcast daily. Heard from a guy today, Carl Adler, one of our everydayers, and is one of the now former season ticket holders who just got their tickets revoked. Nolan, what do you make of all this? We had Tony Stevenson on yesterday, another guy out in Oregon that has only lived out of state for a couple of years, been selling some of his tickets. He's out. What do you make of this whole racket?
I think that's definitely, disappointing to hear. I feel like I'm curious to know how that kind of lines up with the rest of the league. I read a story on it. I think WXYZ did something on it a little while ago.
Yeah.
It stinks. I feel like it'd be nice if there was maybe a case by case basis or something along those lines, because the people that, like my parents have season tickets, they go to most games, but the people that they sit next to, they live in New Jersey, so they come out to 3 or 4 games that they can. But I can't speak for everybody, and what's been, I guess, how uniformly they've been revoking these tickets for people who are selling. But I'm curious to know if there are extenuating circumstances, if they're even having conversations with these people before they revoke the tickets. And I hope that's the case.
No, it sounds like a lot of these were just, they got an email and that's it. They didn't hear from their rep, nothing. I know Tony, who we talked to yesterday, and folks, if you missed yesterday's show, go back and check it out. He's out in Oregon, hadn't heard from his rep, called his rep a week later, and the rep said, hey, we'll see what we can do. He had his tickets 26 years. Wow. And I know, but not a good scene. All right, news of the day, Jonah Jackson on the move, the former Lion. I can't believe this, Nolan. Wouldn't the Bears just have waited for the Rams to cut him? And then Chicago sending a draft pick their way, 6th-round pick. And the former Lions offensive guard is going to be with the Bears this year, but Chicago is going to pay the freight and pay that $17 million salary for next year. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's the last part you mentioned was definitely the most surprising part of that move. I think that obviously when you see new coaches are trying to build their culture, they're trying to install their offense, it's not uncommon at all. Like the fact that they got Jonah Jackson, I think is a good move for them, despite the fact that maybe he hasn't been the Jonah Jackson that we came to expect after his first couple of years in the league. But I still think he can be a good player, and especially in a place where he has some familiarity with that offense. But yeah, the thing you just mentioned, I don't know what Chicago's cap situation looks like fully, but I can't imagine that that's chump change, considering what they're dealing with over there. So that was, to me, the big surprise of all of that was forking out that $17 million, like you mentioned.
All right, so the Lions, for I believe the 7th consecutive year, are not going to use the franchise tag on a guy like Carlton Davis or even Kevin Zeitler. Moving forward, though, that number one, was that a surprise? I know it probably wasn't, but talk about that. And do you think they'll be able to retain some of these guys, their own free agents, who they need?
For sure. And I kind of mentioned this on Twitter the other day. I've written about it a couple of times. Like, realistically speaking, I think Carlton Davis was the only one who was probably ever even consideration to be franchise tag, considering Kevin Zeitler was making $6 million last year. I think they're definitely going to try to get him back at that price. And even if you can't get him back at that price, I'm sure that there's a middle ground to be found there between 6 and whatever it was, 20 something $million. Carlton Davis, that was the one that I kind of had an eye on, but still, I wrote the other day, I thought it was a supreme long shot, but I thought there was a case to be made for it just because of the fact that whatever he's going to be looking at, he's going to want a couple years on his next deal. This is probably his last chance at a big payday. And I guess earlier in the offseason, maybe I had thought that the price tag was going to be up a little bit closer towards that, 17, 18, 20 million mark for whatever he got, because it's not a very deep free agent class at cornerback. So I thought maybe somebody would throw a bag at him. But ultimately, like I'm firmly in the re-sign Carlton Davis camp. I know there's somewhat of injury concerns, but the season ender last year was a freak injury with the broken jaw. He obviously missed a little bit of time with the knee, but he brought everything that team wanted from a veteran cornerback. And, I'm maybe not as sold on the long-term, season-long ability of Amik Robertson to kind of hold up and be that number one corner like some people are suggesting. I see a lot of talk out there of like, oh, you got Amik, you got Terrion, and you got Ennis Rakestraw, and there's your cornerback group right there. You're going to have Ennis playing in the slot, and you're one injury away from Kendall Vildor getting thrown back out there again. So, I mean, I am like, if as far as like priority free agents, I think it goes Carlton Davis 1, Kevin Zeitler 2. I think the third one is maybe Levi Onwuzurike, just because of the position he plays and the trajectory that he's been on over the last, call it 2 years. But I guess really the last year, specifically, I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to bring him back. I don't know what it is. I just have a gut feeling that there's going to be a team out there who says, listen, we like the trajectory this guy's on. We love his body size. You're starting to see, I guess the Cowboys guy just got, he didn't get as much as maybe people expected, but I just still feel like at the end of the day, there's going to be some team out there who has a little bit of cash to throw around, who bets on those traits and bets on that trajectory. It could be the New York Jets, maybe with Aaron Glenn. I just feel like it's going to be tough to retain him after signing Aleem McNeil, a fellow member of his 2021 draft class, to a monster deal this past season.
Nolan Bianchi covers the Lions for the Detroit News, joining us today on a Tuesday Locked On Lions. I'm all for bringing Darius Slay back as long as you get Carlton Davis back. I mean, to me, you can never have enough corners. Dorsey went down with an injury last year. Vildor, like you said, had to play a ton of minutes and a ton of snaps against the Commanders in that game. I'd love for Slay to come back. Want your thoughts on that? But it would be if Davis is back too. Darius is not a number one, right?
I'm in complete agreement with that. And don't get me wrong, he played really well last year, but I just think that like if you're I don't know if that's a bet you can make on him being CB1 or CB2 in a year where you don't have to win the Super Bowl this year, but like, hey, you're kind of getting to that stage where like each bite at the apple is one that's significant in a way that you just never know when it's going to fall apart, when the team is going to have to start, breaking up a little bit, when you're going to start losing some of these rookies. You're going to see the first kind of slew of departures, I think, this offseason. Ifeatu Melifonwu, I think he's probably out the door. I'm curious to see what they do with Derek Barnes. I think his injury might lend itself to a return. But either way, like you're starting to see Brad Holmes' draft picks kind of have to walk out the door. And just to take it back to Darius Slay, like I'm probably in the minority there among my fellow beat writers because it was definitely a topic of conversation when we were in Indianapolis last week. But I just don't love the idea of kind of like I mentioned before of like, oh, like, just run it back with Ennis and Amik, like it's got to be for a low price, and it can't be, he's playing the most meaningful snaps. Now, if they have him on the roster and Carlton Davis gets hurt, it's like, okay, thank goodness they have Darius Slay.
Yes.
But I think on a week one like level, like I don't know if that's the guy you want to be trotting out there kind of upholding your Super Bowl hopes.
No, and look, he's 34. I think if he's cornerback 2 or 3 or 4, yes, but I agree with you about that. Nolan Bianchi with us from the Detroit News. Hey, Jamal Williams is available, by the way. He got let go by the Saints today. He was kind of a legend here for a couple of years, but I highly doubt there'll be a reunion there.
Yeah, that's funny. It's interesting to think about the guys who were here at the beginning, who I think like did have sizable impact on what they were able to build, because I think they were. I know that Sheila Hamp came out and gave that vote of confidence in that 2022 season, but I still think that, if they don't end the season like they did, who knows if they're able to come out in 2023 and have the year that they did. And guys like him, guys like Michael Brockers, who maybe didn't contribute as much on the stat sheet, but was a very real veteran presence in that locker room. I think it's interesting to kind of see those guys still floating around. And he was a guy that bet on himself, and the Lions, I think, got better by him doing that.
More with Nolan coming up next. Let's dive into Indianapolis. His trip down there. He stayed healthy this time. If anybody of you follow Nolan on the social medias, a little accident last year. We'll get into that coming up next, and his thoughts on the combine and some of the players that he saw right here on a Tuesday. Locked On Lions. And we're having some issues with the old screen here, so let's tell you about our friends at FanDuel, folks. Of course, America's #1 sportsbook and the home of the NBA, because when NBA action is just getting started, there's no better place to get in on it than at FanDuel. If you bet on the Pistons last night against the Jazz, you made some money as Detroit continues to win as they're out on the West Coast. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. You got to love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or you pick a player to hit a clutch three at the end of the game, you feel like you've never missed your chance to win some cash. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you do get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Nolan Bianchi with us from the Detroit News, covers the Lions for that outfit. Of course, check him out on all the social medias and at detnews.com. All right, Nolan, you are back from Indianapolis. No scooter injuries this year for you. You're good to go?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. It wasn't the case last year, obviously. I had a little bit of an accident turning into my hotel. I slipped on a little bit of pavement there. The back wheel fell out. I hurt my knee. Took a couple months to feel right again. It was funny, like, in hindsight, the injury that I had to my knee, because it wasn't like I fell on my knee, like I planted my foot as I was falling, and I thought I like tore something in my knee. And I was getting married in May, and I was like, I just ruined it. I ruined everything. Yeah. I'm gonna have to walk down the aisle in a brace. But no, my B partner Richard Silva, he convinced me to get back on the scooter. He's a young man, and he was trying to encourage me to get back on the horse. And I'm not afraid of the scooters anymore, so that's good.
There's a ton of them in that town. It's just
yes,
it's crazy how they're just laying everywhere. But all right, what as you drove back from Indy to Detroit and you were heading up 94 or 69 or whatever, what were some of the bigger takeaways from the combine from last week for you?
Well, I think the main thing was that the defensive line class, whether it be the edge, whether it be the defensive tackles, is just as deep as maybe we thought coming into this thing. There's so much athleticism at those two positions in this draft. The obvious one that comes to mind is Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher from Texas A&M. And really, there's just not a ton of clarity, I think. I don't know if it gave us a ton of clarity. I think we know who the athletic freaks are in this draft now, but from the mock drafts I'm read, from the big boards I'm reading, it is really all over the place, especially when it comes to these guys. There's just so much variation from board to board, from mock draft to mock draft about who's going to go where. You'll click on, and it's among the reputable guys too. It's not just like among like a variety of like the random guy. You'll go to Daniel Jeremiah's big board and you'll see a guy who's number 3, and you'll go to Dane Brugler's big board. Those are kind of the 2 guys that I really hold to as like the gold standard. And Brugler will have them like 37 or something like that. So it's just really interesting to me, just the wide range of, I guess, grades that people are putting on these guys. But nonetheless, my big takeaway was that Lions are probably going to end up with a defensive lineman in this draft.
At 28, or you just think period?
At 28, yeah. I mean, and I'm kind of, I would say the only position that I'm really intrigued in outside of that is offensive guard. There's a guy at Alabama that I really like, Tyler Booker. He was a guy that I liked going in, and then at the combine, he said, he was asked about, his love of football, and he's like, well, more than my love for football, I love destroying other people's love for football. And I'm like, that guy's a lion. Also, Tate Ratledge from Georgia. He's got an awesome mullet, great mustache. This is high-level analysis I'm bringing to you, but
I saw the videos. He looked like a lion.
That's right. And I think, like I said, that just the sheer amount of athleticism among these players on the defensive line, somebody's going to fall. Like, we were doing our mock draft yesterday, and there were a couple of guys that I was like, feel weird that this guy's still here. And I'm like, somebody's got to fall. Like, it's just going to be the nature of the beast here. And that's obviously good for the Lions, who are picking at the back half of the first round. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go defensive lineman with their first 2 picks in this draft either.
So how do you grade and how do you look at the whole Mike Green, Shamar Stewart situation? And obviously they seem to be, edge rushers near the top. The kid from Tennessee, Pierce, I know is not the greatest kid apparently, and I know might not be the culture fit and the locker room fit here. And then you throw the Ohio State duo in the mix there. How do you kind of handicap all those guys?
Yeah, the Mike Green stuff was definitely interesting. I guess that's the way I'll just leave it there. The Lions have been pretty straightforward with how they treat character concerns in the draft. Generally speaking, they don't draft them. I think it was the 2022 draft when Jalen Carter was available, and Campbell was like vaguely asked about character concerns, but like everybody knew who he was talking about. And he was like, yeah, we don't draft turds. We don't have any room for turds on this team. I think he said something like, you can have one, but any more than that, and you run the risk of it kind of becoming a cancer in your locker room. I ended up in our mock draft yesterday, Kenneth Grant from Michigan is a guy who I ended up taking for the Lions. And again, it was like, is he going to be here at this time? But, he was a guy who didn't test at the combine. Obviously, Michigan's pro days is what it is. And I just feel like there's a chance that he got usurped by some of the other defensive tackles and defensive linemen in this draft. And that's the guy I'm kind of zeroing in on right now. My beat partner, Richard, he had him going Donovan not Onzarike.
The kid from Boston College.
Yeah, Boston College. So those are kind of the 2 options that we had a circle going into or coming out of the weekend for us.
Nolan Bianchi with us from the Detroit News. You mentioned before about interior defensive linemen and edges. It just seems like there's so many of those guys that, like you just kind of pointed out, last year they go cornerback. They start with 2 corners. You could see a scenario where 28's an edge and then 54 or whatever it is, 56 is a D tackle.
Yeah, just because this class is so deep. I remember like when I very first started digging into the draft in general, I was watching a Daniel Jeremiah podcast, and he was saying like, this is if you need defensive line help, this is a really good draft to have picks between 25 and 60, because like I said, there's not much clarity kind of in the top half of the first round. But once you get to that back half of the first round, like you're going to get a good player regardless, whether it be a guy like a Shamar Stewart who didn't have a ton of production in the pros, but is kind of you're drafting him for his trade. So like a Michael Williams out of Georgia, or it's a guy like Derek Harmon, the Detroit guy, former Michigan State guy, finished his career at Oregon, who he comes out, he's an All-American last year and just a ton of production for a championship contending team. So I think that there's a very good chance that they walk out of the first 2 rounds of the draft with 2 edge rushers. or two defensive linemen. But I think there's a lot of good defenders kind of in general in this draft. It's a little bit of a weaker wide receiver class. I don't necessarily know if I see him going in that direction. I could definitely see him going D line, O line with their first two picks in no particular order. But as we've seen with Brad Holmes time and time again, like he's just going to go best player available. And sometimes that's Jahmyr Gibbs at number 12. And sometimes that's a guy nobody's heard of in Giovanni Manu in the third round, like he did last year. So he's hard to predict. And that's the one thing one caveat I'll put on this is just the fact that you never really know where he's going to go. But I do think that there's a very, very good chance that the best player available at those two picks is the defensive lineman. So that's kind of what gives me the confidence that might happen.
All right, quick, yes or no. The Lions draft a receiver at some point in those 3 days.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
All right, I want to get into free agency with you, Nolan.
And a tight end.
And a tight end?
Yeah.
Really? All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to write that down. And when that happens, we will give you a full All right, free agency, maybe some cuts before we get to Monday. I want to talk about that with Nolan. We'll do that next here on Locked On Lions. And a quick reminder, everybody, if you want to be our call of the day, we will play one tomorrow. Go to speakpipe.com/Dairy podcast page. Leave us a voicemail. Keep it about a minute or so. You want to talk draft or whatever. We'll play the best submission tomorrow on Wednesday's show right here on Locked On Lions. Nolan Bianchi with us from the Detroit News. Free agency, Nolan, starts Monday. Everything will start leaking out, certainly, and I know they'll make a lot of the signings official, I believe, on Wednesday, but Monday is going to be a busy day. How do you think Brad Holmes approaches it, and do you think there'll be any surprise cuts before free agency? Could DJ Reader be gone, or Graham Glasgow, Darius Smith? How are you reading the tea leaves there?
From the potential cap casualties, I don't see it being Zadarius Smith or DJ Reader. Obviously, those guys who are their pay is going to start in the double digits next year in terms of millions. But you just look at the injuries that they suffered at the end of last year. I don't necessarily know that Aleem McNeil is going to be ready. So if you take him out of the equation, Levi Onwuzurike leaves in free agency. Like I think you're going to want DJ Reader there to kind of be that guy who's able to hold things down. And then the same thing with Zadarius Smith. I was kind of surprised to see a lot of people mentioning him as a potential cap casualty just because of the fact that he's not due a ton of money this year. Like he's due like somewhere in the range of like $11 million. And considering what he gives you, which is 60 to 80 pressures and averaging 8 sacks over his last 3 years, I think that's more than fair market value for a guy with that type of production. So on that front, I would say maybe Glasgow, a guy who struggled a little bit, but he's also had a little bit of an interesting journey since he came back to Detroit. He had that really good year at right guard. Then they bring in Zeitler. They flip him over to left guard where he doesn't necessarily perform as well. And I won't make any bones about it. He was not good in pass protection last year. Maybe they're definitely probably the weakest link on a really strong offensive line. And with Christian Mahogany kind of waiting in the wings, I do kind of wonder how they're going to approach that if they do bring Zeitler back. But I could definitely see maybe a restructure for Glasgow or maybe a cut and, re-signing or something along those lines, because I do think that they enjoy the depth that they have at that position. And I don't think that they're just going to go, ooh, Christian Mahogany looked really good in those 2 games. Like, let's get a veteran starter out of here, especially if, obviously we'll see what happens with Kevin Zeitler. But those are the 3 guys that, you just mentioned that, and that's how I kind of see it going.
All right, take me through your thoughts on Monday. Brad Holmes has never been a home run hitter on the first day. Signing Brian Burns to crazy money, or Danielle Hunter last year, names that were like, oh, the Lions should go get these guys, and they were signing for 20 and $30 million and stuff. But how do you think Brad approaches this? And does he start with Carlton Davis first? And let's say Carlton goes to the Jaguars, then does he go get a Charvarius Ward or somebody like that? How do you see it?
I'm not certain that they would go out and make a splash signing at corner if they don't get Carlton Davis back, because I think the whole thing about bringing Carlton back is he just fits your system so well. Like I expect Calvin Shepard to play a lot of man defense again this year. And if that's the case, he's kind of the perfect guy for the situation. But if he doesn't come back, I could see them maybe going out and trying to do something a little bit more that is a little more friendly to the budget at cornerback. But I would say on the whole, I don't really see them making a ton of splash signings. And Brad Holmes kind of said as much at his press conference at the Combine, where he was like, oh, we have all these guys that we're going to need to pay. And Dave Burkett from the Free Press even asked him as we were walking away, like, do you see yourself being able to afford another premium edge rusher or premium player for that defensive line? And he said, no. Now, a couple days later, there's a report that Detroit was pushing hard for Myles Garrett at the trade deadline. I don't know what to make of it. Obviously, I didn't verify that myself, but I think if that's the case, and maybe, I don't know, maybe the door is back open for that, and Brad's just playing a little bit coy. But I think for the most part, because of what he said at the Combine, and something else he said that struck me was, when he said, you look at guys who are $6 to $8 to $10 million, that's not chump change. And so I think he was kind of already setting expectations a little bit to that degree of, they might go out and they might get a guy who's $6 to $8 to $10 million. But on the whole, man, like if you can just bring everybody back from last year, like I know you lost in the first round, but that defense was decimated. I don't think you can really anticipate that type of attrition happening again. And I think in an ideal world, like you just say, let's just bring everybody back, hope that horrible, horrible thing that happened to us last year doesn't happen again, and run it back. That's kind of how I see it. Like maybe get a guy or two for the defensive line, but outside of that, I don't really see the need to go crazy in free agency, especially with all these extensions coming down the pipe.
It's now out that the Lions, of course, are going to pick up Aiden Hutchinson's fifth-year option. It would be $20 million. And the same would go for J-Mo at around $20 million. What do you think they'll do with Williams?
I think they'll bring him back. I think he's closer to did that news just break, by the way? Was on Aiden?
Oh, no. Is something going on while we're talking?
Oh, no. I thought you said
I was reading that.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. J-Mo's a little bit cheaper. The thing with Hutchinson is that he kind of got those boosts from making a Pro Bowl. So he's going to be up around 20 million, but J-Mo I think is going to be somewhere around 14, 15 million. I think that picking up that fifth-year option is a no-brainer. I don't think he's a candidate to get extended this offseason. I think that's a situation where you probably want to see him just, stay clean a little bit before you're willing to make that type of investment. And then you got Kirby Joseph coming down the pipe as well. He's going to be eligible for an extension starting March 12. And that's another interesting situation where you have this guy who's the best in the league at what he does since he's entered the league. He leads the league with 17 interceptions since 2022. But you also have this guy in Brian Branch who, I don't want to say he's the overall better football player, but like he is kind of that Swiss Army knife, and I think he brings just as much, if not more, value. And do you want to end up in a situation where you're paying your safety tandem $40 million a year? I don't know. I can't see Kirby Joseph getting anything less than what Xavier McKinney got last year, just because of that little rivalry going on. And I think Xavier McKinney's at 16 point something, so I'm expecting him to be or Joseph's desired number to be somewhere up there close to the $20 million range. And, they got to make a decision there. But I think at the end of the day, Kirby does something that nobody else in the league can replicate with his ball skills and all that other stuff. So I do think you kind of got to bring him back.
Nolan, great to see you. Thanks so much for stopping by today and doing this. Love reading in the Detroit News. Keep up the great work, and we'll talk again soon.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
You got the Rays. Nolan Bianchi with us on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Lions. Back again tomorrow.